Okay, guys and girls. So obviously, today is the MAPS exam, so I don't really see any of you guys periods 1 through 4. So this is something you're working on your own. This is also excellent practice for when my baby comes. That you get a little practice of doing some more asynchronous work. Good thing with asynchronous work is you can pause the video, you can work at your own pace, you can skip ahead if you understand. Like you can work at your own pace, which is good. Though I'm not really here for questions, you can of course email me if you have a question. So the focus question is, how did Black people progress towards equality throughout the progressive era? Meaning, we focus on a lot of different groups of people. We look at trying to fix problems. Where we last left off with African Americans was at the end of Reconstruction and segregation. So in what ways are we trying to work for African American equality in the progressive era? And the short answer is there really isn't too much that goes on in terms of the progressive era and the focus for African Americans. There's a couple of things. All right. So let's first start with copying down what's in red. If you need to go back and pause the focus question and write it down, please do. So African Americans in the progressive era. So probably the biggest muckraker you're going to learn about at this point is a person by the name of Ida B. Wells. She's known as, during the progressive era, a muckraker specifically for African Americans. And African Americans, you have your problem on the left, still suffering from segregation and mistreatment all throughout the country after Plessy versus Ferguson. A big thing that came out that a lot of African Americans kind of did have some success with was trying to get rid of lynching. Okay, lynching, for those that don't know, are basically when someone hangs another person out in public. This could be done to any race, but it was particularly more of a thing that happened to Black people by usually white supremacist groups like the KKK. So Ida B. Wells kind of wants to come out and make a law and expose that lynching is a serious problem, of course, that goes without saying, and wants to kind of go about and, let people know how this is happening, especially in a lot of places in the South, and how this is something we should, try and change as a country. So the muckraker Ida Wells comes out. She writes the book called The Red Record. Goes into a lot of things, but the biggest thing from this book was basically an anti-lynching campaign to try and get folks to stop lynching, certain groups, specifically African Americans. But besides Ida Wells, not too much was done in terms of progress. I mean, from this point, we are a segregated country. America is having the separation of whites and colored people. And this is both something not only white people are okay with, Black people are okay with as well. So it's kind of like this is how it's set up. But we know that the segregation is going to kind of get worse and worse over time. But throughout the progressive era from like 1897 to like 1910, 1915, it's not necessarily so much of a problem, as weird as that sounds. Black people were okay with being segregated. They just they had a problem with the lack of equality. So at this point, they're still trying to come together for that. Another big reason happens to be with the two biggest influential African Americans at the time are two people by the name of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, you're not going to have to really write down necessarily the distinct differences of each of these individuals. This is something you could research more on your own if you're interested. But basically, the leadership for African Americans, these two particular people, didn't really see eye to eye on how to do it. And I'll kind of go over how both of them kind of have some differing thoughts and feelings. And you can see why there's a little bit of a struggle for African Americans to get equality throughout the progressive era. I guess when their own group of leaders isn't exactly on the same page themselves. Okay, so let's take a look at the differences between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Both are big, influential leaders in American history, for sure. And I don't say African American history, I say American history, because African American history and Latino American history and Italian American history, it's all part of under American history. Okay, it's all related, I promise you. Okay, so Ida Wells you have. Let's take a look at these two other people. You don't need to write this unless you're just kind of curious about who these two people were and how they difference. So Booker T. Washington is most known for what his thoughts were with something called the Atlanta Compromise. And it was kind of centered around this idea that African Americans have to focus on achieving economic prosperity first before you get anything, any change in the African American community, you have to build up the wealth of the African American community. Okay? He didn't want to focus on trying to put African Americans in power as much as trying to build up the community by giving them more economic advantage. Okay? And Booker T. Washington, was a little bit more wanting to, I don't want to say desegregate, but he was definitely more willing to kind of play along with the white people and the people leading government to basically say, black people don't mind working for white people. We need to make as much money as possible, so we don't really care how we do it. So that was kind of his perspective. W.E.B. Du Bois kind of was no compromise at all. Okay, he didn't come in saying, we kind of need to work with white people. He basically saw this. He saw no advantage in giving up on civil rights, and he was specifically focused on trying to make sure every single African American had a political point of view and, of course, the right to vote. Where we last left off with the vote is grandfather clause, the literacy test, the poll taxes. And African Americans aren't getting those, the right to vote. So his biggest thing was trying to get rid of those laws, okay, and try and get more African Americans into political power. Therefore, they can make some serious changes to government. So both have differing perspectives. Both want to help out the African American communities, but where do you focus? Do you focus on making them more money, okay, and then that could lead to them gaining more power? Or do you kind of focus on the W.B. Du Bois? Don't worry about the money yet. Get them into political power first, and then that's going to bring up the economic standing within the black community. And he was also very big in African Americans educating themselves. Obviously, to be in government, you need to be, well educated at the time. So getting a good education for African Americans there was a crucial thing. Why Washington was called the Atlanta Compromise? Because of his speech in Atlanta. And he became nationally famous from this speech. Okay, after he gave the speech, kind of was recognized by everyone. He saw as a necessary step to establish education and legal fairness for blacks. Okay, Du Bois, who heard about the compromise while living in the North, immediately criticized it. Not that they were necessarily trying to stop, African American equality. They wanted the same thing, but basically Du Bois thought that this was a waste of time. Okay, and he suggested that this is a compromise that conceded to, I know you probably can't see it because I can't see it right now. I think it's going to say white supremacy and black superiority. Okay, if you have a black person just worried about making money for himself and his family, as opposed to trying to change the entire system and political governance of the laws that are maybe keeping African Americans back, that is the one thing. I often get asked the question, in 2021, is America systemically racist? And that's a very controversial thing because we don't really have any laws in 2021 that stop African Americans from succeeding. But in 1890, in 1900, America was systemically racist for sure because you had actual systemic laws that led to racism, right? Plessy versus Ferguson, the Jim Crow laws, okay, redlining. Okay, these were things that kind of stopped African Americans from succeeding, where in 2021, you don't necessarily have those. And the reason I say that is I get asked this question a lot, okay, is America systemically racist? In this year, that's a very complicated question, okay? You got to do your own research and figure out if you believe that or not. But what I will say is systemic means laws that are put in place. And in this particular time, Washington and Du Bois are recognizing those laws and trying to work around them. Okay, and it's not easy to do. So that's why throughout the progressive era, a lot of black people don't really have too much of a change besides the less lynching, okay, which is a step forward. I would say not a major step forward, but a step forward. Okay. So the Regents question dealing with this is W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington strongly disagreed over the what. If you remember, they have to do with African American equality. It's a rather easy question. Okay, that correct answer is going to be 3: method and speed for attaining equal rights for African Americans. Okay, so with that being said, I want to just clarify before we get to the assignment. There are 3 kind of like random muckrakers that I kind of just want to go over quick. These particular muckrakers are, not the biggest. They're not Jacob Reese. They're not Upton Sinclair, but they are people that I have seen come up on the region. So I do want to make sure we do know them. Though you're just going to copy down notes for this slide, you are going to have a little bit of a reading on them shortly, so you'll get a little more information on them. So Frank Norris is the first person that I want you to kind of know. He is a muckraker that comes up as well. He published a book called The Octopus. It looks like this right here. And basically, it exposed the unfair working conditions in the railroad. This kind of indirectly led to the Interstate Commerce Act and the Sherman Antitrust Act that kind of broke up the railroad monopolies a little bit. His book was kind of influential in that. Okay, and he's known for helping to break up the railroads and exposing how corrupt some of the railroads are and how sometimes Vanderbilt, the monopoly owner, wasn't so good. Lincoln Steffens, okay, another one here, The Shame of the Cities, exposed corruption in politics in his book. Okay, very similar to Jacob Riis, not quite as popular because he didn't really have the photos of the tenements and he wasn't quite as popular in American history, but did a very similar thing, exposed how the cities were just a mess, very filthy, poor in a lot of cases. So he's also known for that, Lincoln Steffens. And then probably the biggest of the three here that you might see is Ida Tarbell, because she's pretty big in women's history and then also pretty big in the progressive era. So she was very, very big in going after John D. Rockefeller. Now, I told you, people in history are sometimes complicated. John D. Rockefeller is one of those examples where this guy did a lot of great things. Okay, he created a lot of great programs, but also had some kind of ruthless business tactics and did some bad things. Every president, every politician, every person in history has some good and bad to them. That's every human being, right? There's good and bad to everyone. All right. Only the really, really bad people maybe don't have much good to them. Like I wouldn't say Adolf Hitler had so much good to him, right? I wouldn't say, some of these, cruel people throughout history, Genghis Khan. Okay, another one in a world history to learn about. Maybe not the best guy. Maybe he doesn't have too much good in them. But most everyday humans and politicians and presidents and muckrakers have good and bad. And in this case, Ida Tarbell was very big in exposing John D. Rockefeller's bad side. Okay, the way he was a robber baron, the way he was a little bit corrupt, the way he took advantage of a lot of his workers and kind of exposed Rockefeller for, some of the bad things that he did. There's a little quote here from there. Just basically going over Rockefeller if you want to read it. This was given by Ida Tarbell. All right. So, this is Monday's lesson, so we're going to hold off there. If you're noticing this lesson today, it's a little bit of a long reading. It's a little bit of a long assignment. Actually, it shouldn't be that bad. You guys work pretty fast. All right, so let's make sure we're sharing here. Okay, it looks like we are. Okay, so if you look to the classwork, sorry, I'm doing this the day before. If you look to the classwork, African Americans in the Progressive Era, all right, you will see two things. You have a reading, looks like this. Okay, it goes through the muckrakers. Definitely do the reading. Then you're also going to use this chart. Both are kind of ways to help you to answer these questions here, 1 through 10. All right, the biggest muckrakers you have to know for the Regents are Upton Sinclair, without a doubt. Jacob Riis, without a doubt. Okay, you have to know those two. Those are the two most important. Then everyone else is kind of like, it's good to know. It'd be good to know just one or two things about them. But Riis and Upton Sinclair, you should know the name of their book. You should know what they're trying to do. You should know their goals. Okay, the other ones maybe not as important. Okay, for the Regents exam. We have 10 questions here. Questions 1 through 9 are pretty much from the reading or from the chart. Question 10 is more of an opinion question about what are some issues that reporters, or what are basically present-day muckrakers trying to expose. Spend some time on 10, maybe doing a little bit of current events answer type there. All right. So that's what you have to do for this period. And of course, I did share with you, if you notice, I shared with you the answer key. It's very helpful if you just write the answers here in the answer key so I don't have to go searching through the documents. All right, that is it for this particular period. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will keep you posted on the baby situation. It could be any moment. So, you will hear from me if the baby does come. All right, have a good rest of your day.